And before we start, I want to let you know that this is quite exciting in a way. We're reaching people across the country. We have probably between 500 to 1,000 people joining us that we know of, and we have people as far as South Africa joining today. So this clearly speaks about how agroecology is a growing movement. So my name is Geneviève Grossenbacher, and I work with USC Canada, a small nonprofit located here in Ottawa that works around the world. We're one of the many organizers of this event. So on that note, I'm very pleased again to be part of this event, and I'd like to introduce to you Eric Chorette, who's going to be your MC for the event. Eric is a wonderful man who works with Interpares and also who's the chair of Food Secure Canada, one of the organizations for this event.
Thank you very much, Geneviève. For the record, Geneviève is also a wonderful woman. So welcome, everybody. This is a tremendous event. We're very happy to have you all here. And welcome to How to Feed 9 Billion on a Small Planet. So as Geneviève said, I am Eric Chorette. I work for a social justice organization called Interpares and a very proud chair of Food Secure Canada. I'm one of the organizers of this webinar today, and I'm very pleased to have you all tuning in from across the country and also from South Africa. So I'll be your MC for the event.
Yeah.
Our MC, Bob Cardy, was supposed to MC the event, but unfortunately he fell ill. So get better, Bob. We're sending positive thoughts and energy to you today. Now, in this webinar, you will see how growing evidence shows that agroecology will feed the world, while business as usual will not. This event is organized and supported by a collective of organizations, including USC Canada, Interpares, Food Secure Canada, the School of International Development and Global Studies of the University of Ottawa, the Sierra Youth Coalition, Meal Exchange, ETC Group, the Canadian Biotechnology Action Network, Ramshorn, the National Farmers Union, and Development and Peace. So why have we decided to hold such an event? Because it's high time we put agroecology into the spotlight, into people's imagination, into farmers' fields, and into public policy. There is a lot of fear and uncertainty out there. How can the earth continue to cope with so many people? How can so many people feed themselves with such limited resources? And how will we do this with the onset of climate change? While the challenges are very real, the solutions to these problems are within our reach. We're here today to hear from people who are stating clearly that agroecology will feed the world, and business as usual will not. Common sense is on our side, but scientific reports also. Be it the landmark report by the International Assessment on Agricultural Science, Technology, and Development, or from the UN Special Rapporteur Olivier de Schutter, or more recently, the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. Report after report vindicate what many of us intuitively or through experience have known for a long time, that diversity, not monoculture, is more resilient, that caring for the soil rather than spraying it with chemicals leads to better yields over time, that food can be produced ecologically and farmers do not have to starve doing it. All these studies also call on an urgent and widespread global shift in farming away from industrial production models towards agroecology in order to increase food production and better mitigate the effects of climate change. Agroecology combines time-tested agricultural techniques and knowledge with the best in science and technology, generating high yields and innovative business models. It is increasingly recognized as a long-term solution to many of the world's food and climate problems. But you don't have to take my word for it. We're pleased to have one of the world's leading authorities on agroecology, Miguel Altieri, with us today. Miguel Altieri is a professor of agroecology at the University of California in Berkeley. He's also the author of more than 200 publications and numerous books, including Agroecology, the Science of Sustainable Agriculture, and Biodiversity. Miguel Altieri will be joined by Jean-Martin Fortier, an organic farmer from Quebec, who, with his wife, are managing to feed 250 families, enhancing biodiversity, and they're making a decent living. You will soon be able to read all about it in his soon-to-be-published book, The Market Gardener. The original French version of the book, Le Jardinier Maraîcher, is already on stands, and it is selling like hotcakes. Now, Some will say that agroecology is nothing new. To them I answer, you're right, in part. Agroecology is breaking new ground on many fronts of agricultural science, but it also relies on time-tested knowledge and the practice of treating Mother Earth with care. To argue this point, I'm very pleased to also welcome Henry Lickers, a respected environmental scientist with the Mohawk Council of Akwesasne. And last but certainly not least, we have Sarah Archibald, coordinator of the Campus Food Systems Network. She's working with young people from coast to coast who know we can eat better, grow better, and who are proving it on campuses across the country. And most importantly, we're joined by those who have tuned in to this webcast from 300 locations across the country, and we've learned from South Africa. Some of you may be one or two people viewing, while others are participating in classrooms. So by our estimates, we have at least, Genevieve said 500, I say we have at least 1,000. We'll see at the end how many people participated, but it's great to have you all here. So let's get on with it then, and hear from Miguel Altieri.
Well, thank you very much for this invitation to be able to talk to so many colleagues in Canada about these important issues, about the problems that are facing humanity, especially in food production. When the Green Revolution started about 60 years ago, there were several assumptions that were made when they launched this industrial agricultural model, especially in the north and then down. The first assumption was that we were going to have unlimited energy and cheap petroleum. Second one is that we're going to have stable climate and abundant water. So with these assumptions, basically what we have done is that the landscapes of the world have been dominated with monocultures of cotton, maize, soybean, wheat, rice, in about 90% of the 1.5 billion hectares that are devoted to agriculture. These monocultures obviously can be very productive, but the question is for how long and at what cost. Next. One of the main problems with these monocultures is their vulnerability to climate change. Last year, in the Midwest of the United States, they experienced the worst drought in 50 years, and the losses in corn production and soybean were about 30%. Most of these crops are transgenic crops and have no capabilities of resilience. So it is very, very dangerous to put in the hands of an industrial model the food security of the world, especially genetically homogeneous monocultures that are very vulnerable to climate change. So the quick question that we have, and we know the answer, is that modern agroecosystems are not able to confront extreme climatic events. And these events are going to be increasingly more frequent, as we are already experiencing. In less than 1 week, we had a huge typhoon, and here in the United States, about 80 tornadoes. So if we look at the planet, we can see that we have many, many systems at risk that are confronting problems of water scarcity, pollution, loss of biodiversity, desertification, erosion, etc. And they're all linked to a model of economic growth that is extractive and non-sustainable. So really, if we go back to Einstein when he asked the question, we cannot solve the problems with the same mentality that created them. So greening the systems is not going to go to the root causes of the problem. We need to really change dramatically our agricultural systems in able to make them more diversified, more resilient, more socially equitable. And unfortunately, the world is moving into a diet, especially with new countries like China and India, that are starting consuming more and more protein, that actually we don't have enough water to maintain that diet. You can see there that a kilo of beef requires 15,000 liters of water, and we don't have the water, at least here in the United States, to maintain that kind of diet, and I don't think China or India does either. So we're moving into systems that are going to be highly dependent on water, and they're highly subsidized through through the subsidies of the government. Here in the United States, $21 billion of subsidies. 10% of the largest farmers obtain 65% of those subsidies, and basically what they grow is corn and soybean to increase production of beef and also biofuels. Next. So this model that was based on assumptions that are not valid anymore were proposed to solve the problems of hunger by maintaining a very Malthusian view of the problem of hunger. You know, you can see there the assumptions. You know, people starve because there is not enough food, populations grow exponentially, and hunger therefore will be solved by increasing food production with high input technology from the north. Progress requires the replacement of local varieties for improved ones, and then peasants need to be modernized. They need to be integrated into the global economy. And these were the assumptions of the Green Revolution, and then now the assumptions of the biotechnology revolution. Next. Despite all the efforts that have been going on historically, next please, in terms of agricultural revolutions that have been transferring technology from the north to the south, hunger still increases. Next please. We have today about 1 billion people that are hungry. And so I don't like to be cornered about, you know, this question whether agroecology can feed or not the world, because it's really not just a technical issue. It's a problem that is much deeper. So, as I said, you know, the reason why people are hungry is not because there's no production. It's because, you know, 1/3 of the planet's population makes less than $2 a day. There's a lot of inequity in the access to land, seeds. You know, just think about that. 78% of all undernourished children under 5 that live in the third world live in countries with food surpluses, many of them net exporters. Next. There's issues also about, you know, that diverting grain to feed animals. This amount of grain that we feed to animals, about 650 million tons, is equivalent to the annual calorie needs of more than 3.5 billion people. Next. In addition to that, we have food waste. Each of us here in the north, in the US and Europe and probably Canada, throws away about 115 kilos per person per year. That's about 1.3 billion food that actually, if there was a way to transfer it to Africa, it could feed the whole African continent. Next, please. So there's too much focus on the proximate causes of hunger. We blame nature, climate change, the increased consumption of meat in India, China, Brazil, that there's low grain reserves in the countries, the high cost of petroleum that increases the cost of fertilizers, and therefore farmers don't have access to that, and then agrofuels that are basically starting to take over some of the agricultural land. Next. Although these proximate causes are important, they are not really the root causes of the problem. And because we're looking at the symptoms and not at the root causes of the problem, we continue with this Malthusian approach of trying to promote more productivity to increase production and thus solve the problems of hunger. So biotechnology, in the form of transgenic crops, today is being promoted as the great solution to hunger. We have about 180 to 190 million hectares of transgenic crops, but there's not 1 hectare of those 190 million hectares that is feeding one of the 1 billion people that are hungry, which is our problem. We are not the problem. The problem is the 1 billion people that are hungry. So why is it that these transgenic crops are not feeding anybody? Well, the two only food crops that are dominant is corn and soybean. Half of the corn and half of the soybean go to feed animals, which actually most of the grain is exported to China and to Europe from the third world, and corn, which also half of it goes to and then corn and soybean, that also goes the other half to biofuels. With this agriculture, we're increasing the monocultures, and and therefore increasing the dependence of farmers on this technology that makes them highly vulnerable. So you can see here, for example, how soybean Roundup Ready condemns farmers to monoculture. You could not diversify this farming system with any other crops because the only crop that is resistant to the herbicide is the soybean. Next. And these crops, together with maize, sugarcane, and palm oil, are increasingly colonizing the landscapes of the world to produce biofuels at the expense, next, of crops that feed us, such as wheat, rice, barley, potatoes, etc., whose areas and production are leveling off or even declining. And as you know, this process is all linked to land grabbing, which is already reaching proportions in Africa of more than 80 million hectares that are in the hands of different countries like China, the Emirates, but also corporations and even northern governments that are colonizing lands to produce biofuels, not for the Africans, but for their needs in the future. So really the root causes of the problem is that we have a food system that is increasingly controlled by a group of multinational corporations, all the way from grain merchants and biotechnology companies, the supermarkets, and ADM and Cargill and Bunge control 80% of the grain, and Monsanto about 1/5 of all the seeds. And these corporations have formed an alliance next that actually van der Ploeg, one of the rural sociologists in Wageningen, calls the food empires. They control what the producers produce, how much they're going to produce, how they're going to produce it, for whom they're going to produce, and with what technologies. And they also control what the consumers are going to eat, how much they're going to eat, what quality of the food, and how much they're going to pay for it. That's the food empires that basically are determining, not only the nature of the landscapes of the world that are going to be increasingly devoted to producing biomass, not so much food, and the types of food and the technologies that we're going to use in producing food. And as you know, many of the food riots that happened in 2008 were not due to the fact that there was no food. It's because the price of food went up, which is actually the product of speculation. Next, if you look at the next slide, you can see that the profits of the multinationals at the time of the food riots and when there was hunger and protests all over the world was the highest. Next. So really, in conclusion to this introduction, is that the world already produces enough food to feed 9 to 10 billion people, the population peak expected by 2050. I don't know if you've heard of the people from the World Bank, FAO, CGIAR, all saying that we need to double food production for the year 2050. I really don't know where are they getting these figures. They're ignoring absolutely all this information that I've given before. What is really interesting is that 50% of the food that we eat is produced on 360 million small farms that occupy 20% of the arable land. Can you imagine if they control 50% of the land, how much food the small farms would be producing? Industrial agriculture only produces 30% of the world's food. And most of that production, as I said, goes to grain crops for biofuels and confined animals. So therefore, this call to double food production by 2050 only applies if we continue to prioritize the growing population of livestock and cars over hungry people. In conclusion, increasing yields is a necessary but not sufficient condition to meeting people's food needs. So what is the challenge that we are facing then? Is that food production must increase? Yes, it's a necessary condition in a sustainable manner by using the same or less arable land, because a lot of land is going to be devoted to biofuels or is going to be degraded, definitely with less petroleum or much more expensive petroleum, less water, less nitrogen, within a scenario of climate change, social unrest, and financial crisis. So what we pose as agroecologists is that this challenge cannot be met with the existing industrial agricultural model and its biotechnological derivations, and what we need is a new form of agriculture, which agroecology provides the base. The agriculture that we need for the future is an agriculture that has to be decoupled from fossil fuel dependence, creating agroecosystems of low environmental impact that are nature-friendly, diversified, that are resilient to climate change and other shocks, that are multifunctional, not only that provide ecological services, but also social, cultural, etc. And they provide a foundation for local food systems. But because the challenge is that we need to shorten the distance between producers and consumers. That would have huge implications in terms of energy and in terms of emissions of greenhouse gases. So among all the models that we can use, where you have here high diversity or low diversity, productivity high and low, what we're looking for are the systems on the top left. Those are the agroecological systems that have high productivity, high diversity, high efficiency, because they require very low external inputs, high recycling rates, crop livestock integration. So we're looking for integration, efficiency, synergy in the system. Now when we ask who is practicing that agriculture, really the indigenous farmers of the third world have been doing this for centuries. If you go to the Andes, you go to Mesoamerica, you go to the lowland tropics in Latin America, which I have more experience in, you'll find farmers that have been doing this type of agriculture that is highly efficient, highly diversified, highly resilient. These small farmers, as I said before, they produce about 50% of the food, and there are countries where we have very interesting statistics showing the role of these small farmers in food security. In Brazil, 4.8 million traditional family farmers produce more than 70% of the food that is being eaten in that country. And that's why the government created a Ministry of Agriculture called the Ministry of Rural Development that specializes in protecting the small farmers. The government of Brazil, for example, guarantees 30% of buying the food that the small farmers produce for what they call the social market. In India, the importance of the small farmers. In Cuba, and many, many countries, the small farmers play a key role, but not many governments are recognizing the role and protecting them from these global markets that are skewed against them. So these small farmers, what they've been doing is that they have been the safeguarders of millions and millions of varieties. According to data from ETC, about 1.9 million crop varieties are in the hands of the small farmers, whereas the Green Revolution only created 8,000 varieties, with all the support from all their foundations and governments. Many times I wonder, why are we trying to breed new crops when we have 1.9 billion varieties of crops, and we only know about the potential of about 35% of those varieties. Now, these varieties are deployed in very interesting cropping systems, especially polycultures. In Latin America, corn and beans, more than 60% of the corn and about 50% of the beans are intercropped by small farmers. And they are much more productive than monocultures, and that's calculated through what is called the land equivalent ratio. So when you get a value of 1.5, that means you need 1.5 hectares of monoculture to obtain the same productivity of 1 hectare of polyculture. Next. Let's look at, for example, coffee systems. You know, we all drink coffee in the morning, but, you know, in order to produce this coffee, farmers have a millenary knowledge, although coffee was introduced from Africa to Latin America, but the management of the systems is in the hands of indigenous people that have a very, very intensive knowledge of the complexities of this forest, because it's really a forest. For example, if you go to southeast Mexico, in Chiapas or Puebla, you will find systems that have about 350 plant species and about 150 species per hectare. So if you can see here this farmer that is trying to manage 1 hectare with 150 plant species, the amount of knowledge that farmer has to know about each one of these plants, when to prune them, when to cut them, when to harvest them, etc., etc. The most sophisticated organic farmer in the United States, here in California, manages about 10 species. And you can see here that the productivity of this forest, there are between 40 to 140 species of plants per hectare, as I said. Many of them go for subsistence, for local markets, playing a very important role in food security at the community and at the regional level. And then part of the production goes to national and international markets. So these farmers are able to obtain income from the national and international markets, but also play an important role in the food security of the country. So it's not just coffee that they're producing. They're producing many crops that play very important roles in the food sovereignty of particular communities. So peasant agriculture, that has been in place for centuries, are the roots of the agroecological paradigm. And what agroecology tries to do is create a dialogue of wisdoms between the Western science, especially ecology and some aspects of agronomy, with the traditional knowledge. And why peasant agriculture is so important is because the levels of biodiversity that they exhibit, the ingenious systems and technologies at the landscape level in terms of land and water management, with the high energy efficiency of the systems, the resiliency and robustness, and the innovations that farmers are continually doing, and the collective forms of social organizations to socialize that knowledge. I like to go to the example of Cuba because it's very important. A lot of people question whether it's possible to have an agriculture without petroleum. Well, the Cubans, as you know, at the end of the 80s, experienced a major drop in the imports of fertilizers, petroleum, pesticides due to the dissolution of the Soviet bloc. So can you imagine if tomorrow, because this process was very sudden, we turn off the entrance of fertilizers, petroleum, and pesticides in Canada at a 70% level? There would be total chaos. Well, in Cuba, there was a little bit of chaos at the beginning, but because of their social organization and also because of the human capital that the country has. They have 2% of the Latin American population, but 11% of the scientists. You can see in this graph that before the special period, which is the white bars, and those are the different crops, corn, beans, rice, etc., the contribution of these peasants was very little in relation to the needs of the country. And you can see that after the black bars is the contribution when the petroleum and pesticides and fertilizers were gone. So what is really interesting is that we're seeing that, and this is happening in many countries, when the crisis hit, the ones that feed the people are the small farmers, those that did not rely on the fossil fuel agriculture. Next. Now, in Cuba, this process was reached through a campesino process, which is an horizontal way of exchanging information. And here you can see that in 1999, right after the special period, when the special period started, you can see here that there were 216 farmers using agroecological methods associated to ANAP, which is the National Association of Producers. And today there's about 130,000 farmers that are actually using agroecological methods, all through the campesino exchange program. Well, these farmers use a lot of agroecological methods of diversification in time and space, using green manures, organic amendments to increase organic matter in the soil biological activity, etc., etc. And one of the things that is really interesting next is that the most sophisticated technology that you're going to see that these farmers use, where we did a study of a farmer that has 10 hectares of land, and he and his family are producing enough protein from 1 hectare to feed 34 people. Okay, so you can see in 10 hectares, they're able to produce enough protein to feed 34 people with an energy efficiency of 30. That means they put 1 kilocalorie and they obtain 30. The most energy efficient organic farming system that I know here in California has an energy efficiency of 3. The next slide shows diversified farming systems that these farmers use, and they have shown to be very, very important in increasing resilience against hurricanes. I don't know if you know that in 2008 there were 3 hurricanes in Cuba, and studies that were done, next slide please, in Santo Espiritu show that the main cooperative level of damage was about 72%, whereas in the category 2 and 3 systems, which were the more diversified farms, only exhibited about 60% damage, which is pretty high because there were 3 hurricanes. But the next slide shows clearly how another dimension of resiliency, which is the recovery rate. And you can see that system number 3, 60 days after the hurricane, started recovering productivity. And it recovered much faster than in all the other systems that were monitored in that area. So in conclusion, the areas under industrial monoculture suffered more damage and exhibited less recovery than diversified farms. And after the hurricane, average loss in diversified farms was about 50% compared to 90 to 100% in the monocultures. And the productive recovery was about 80 to 90% and was noticeable 40 days after the hurricane. So just to finish here, I think what we're going to do is we're going to jump to the slide number 60, which shows the graph of the food empires. I don't know if you see it. Well, basically what the Via Campesina is doing, which is the largest peasant movement, which has adopted agroecology as the basis of the food sovereignty strategy, is one strategy is to fight against the food empires through campaigns and also taking over land and things of that nature. But the most important thing is to build a bypass to that food empire food system controlled by corporations. And this is supported in some countries in Latin America, next slide, by some legal initiatives that have been recently approved. The most important one is the PLANAPO in Brazil, just was approved 2 months ago, where is the National Plan of Agroecology and Organic Farming that is going to promote different policies to protect small farmers and promote agroecology. But we have also laws in Ecuador, in Bolivia, in Guatemala, Venezuela, and Nicaragua, which are all promoting policies and different initiatives that are going to support this. And if you look at the next slide, here we see the distribution of agroecological experiences in Brazil. This is without government support. And can you imagine now with the PLANAPO, it's possible that each one of those dots, the yellow dots that you see there, are going to multiply. They're going to scale up to a level that are going to be incredible. And I think that it's very important to continue watching what's going on in Brazil. Actually, I'm going there next Thursday to the national meeting of agroecology. And the last slide, which is number 65, I just wanted to end here with the study that Berkeley did in the University of Michigan, where she basically looks at different crops, and when the value that you see there, and developed countries and developing countries, when the value is higher than 1, it means that there is potential to enhance productivity using agroecological methods. And you can see that in the north, in developed countries, there's almost no potential to do that. And in developing countries, you have a potential because most of the values are higher than 1, even higher than 2 and 3. The reason why I think this potential to increase production lies more in the south than in the north, although that doesn't mean that in the north you couldn't do it, although major changes of land access and challenging the corporate control of the food system needs to be done. In the south, we have things that are very important. One, we have a millenary agriculture and traditional knowledge. Second, we have all the agrobiodiversity. About 80% of the 1.9 million varieties are in the south. And third, you have the social movements that are behind the agroecological agenda, like the Via Campesina, the MST, and many other organizations. So with that, I'd like to conclude and then make...
Thank you very much, Miguel Altieri, for a thought-provoking presentation. It's interesting to hear that industrial agriculture seems to be the agriculture of the past, and the agriculture of the future is agroecology. And our next speaker practices agroecology. He's a farmer of the future, so I'm very happy to introduce Jean-Martin Fortier, who's going to tell us all about how he farms.
Yeah, I've been growing mixed diversified vegetable organically since 2002, and from the very start, we've been farming on a micro scale level, and Our farm has evolved through time, but we've always kept this idea that small can be profitable and productive. We've been growing food for a long time on small acreage, and from start, our idea is that rather than concentrating on growing our farm bigger, we've tried to focus on growing better. And this idea really came about when we visited, like Miguel mentioned. We went in Cuba in 2000, early 2000s, and that was just when we were finishing university, and we had already started our market garden. We were farming back then, a fifth of an acre, and we were selling directly at a farmer's market and doing a small CSA. And we visited these organoponicos farms where they're like permanent raised beds, but hectares of these permanent raised beds, and they were growing intensively the vegetables inside these permanent raised beds with hand tools. And we really saw that it was perhaps possible when we visited there to have a farming system that was different from what we know and that could use no tractor. And because in Cuba, like Miguel said, they had a shortage of petroleum, so they had no fuel for the tractor and to move on with this type of farming. So coming back home, we started our micro farm, and we used this permanent raised bed system, and we decided to go without a tractor and to space our crop more intensively because we didn't have the limitation of the tractor. And because we didn't need to make new beds every year because they're permanent, well, all the tillage and the heavy machinery that's required to do this, we didn't need to. So basically decided to go without a tractor, not for philosophical reason, because we thought that it would be more productive to go without, which is pretty uncommon in the farming world. So that was a long time ago. And our farm grew and evolved, and there was a lot of work that was done in the conception of the farm, and we were really interested back then in permaculture and what it teaches us, to look at the farming system as a whole and understand all the systems, how they can cooperate, and why certain elements of the farms would be placed there and not there, and try to work in synergy to make a conceptual design that's interesting and that's productive. And that was our focus. And so when we established our new farm in 2005, we took all of these ideas, and our goal was to try and produce and to create a micro farm that was both very productive and profitable. To give you a thermoscopy of what we do is like last year in 2000, we're finishing our 13th year this year, and we grow on 1.5 acre is the size of the production, the garden. So it's about the size of a soccer field, and we feed more than 200 families. Our CSA is 120 on every Wednesday in Montreal, and we do also 2 farmers markets on Saturday morning and on Thursdays. And the sales of the farm, of the vegetable produced on the farm this year is about $140,000. So on 1.5 acre, that's pretty productive. And we're basically using only hand tools. Some of them are here with me today. And because of this, and because of the fact that we didn't mechanize and we didn't take that route, our farm has been profitable ever since we started. And mainly this being explained by the fact that when the equipment cost to get installed was really low, and most of the work we do ourselves, we don't have to hire a big crew to do the work. So we've kept everything small, and we've always had this idea of being really productive and really profitable. And we do this using very low amount of fossil fuel because we don't have a tractor, and all our system is geared towards replacing mechanical tillage by biological tillage and trying to harness the power of earthworms in our permanent beds to do the work for us, supplementing with different hand tools that are really well designed and ergonomic. So moving along, we've kind of developed this system over time. We've researched pretty much everywhere what was being done and what was interesting. And today, it's been more than 10 years since the farm's been pretty much set up, and we're still trying to grow from the inside and develop the farm so that it's not bigger, but it's always more productive, trying to optimize and really develop a biologically intensive cropping system. And these are ideas that I share in the book that I wrote in French, Le Jardinier Maraîcher. It's now being translated into English. And for me, it's about sharing what we've done, because I know that when you want to start a farm, there's a lot of drawbacks when you look at this from the outside in. You look at big farms with the tractor and everything that's needed to be productive. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that we don't need all of this to go on forward. We could be small, you can be productive, you can be biologically diverse, and it's just about reinventing how we see farming. And I think our farm provides an example of this, and there's many other farms that are doing the same elsewhere, and I think it's pretty cool. These are nice examples to pass along, and I'm happy to be part of the movement right on that are promoting these kind of ideas going forward. So.
Merci beaucoup, Jean-Martin. Thank you very much. A great presentation. And the photos of the work that you're doing on your farm will be made available later. Thanks so much. It's great to hear you talk about getting small and smarter to stay in business, because what we hear mostly from the Canadian landscape, the farming landscape, is get big or get out. And obviously that's not working for farmers in Canada. So anyway, thanks so much for your presentation. So now let's hear from Sarah, who's going to tell us about the work that she's doing on campuses across Canada to build sustainable food systems. Sarah.
I'll grab the torch from Jean-Martin, and it's really an honor to be with these incredible speakers today and speaking on behalf of youth. And I'll be speaking mainly about universities, which when you think of universities and the so-called ivory tower, you don't often think of agroecology. But for me, the amazing thing about agroecology is it's not only central to creating ecosystem integrity, but it's also essential to creating food sovereignty for both producers and consumers. And so when I think of sustainable food systems, I think of my time in Honduras when I was actually working with USC there, and food was really this central place of history and tradition, of health and sustainable livelihoods, and it was really an incredible place to be and feel connected to nature and each other. Now I want you to close your eyes for a moment and think of a big slop of cafeteria food, and you don't really feel that sense of connection. So that's really what we're trying to do with my work right now, is to feel this sense, to feel this joy at every step of the food system. So I think it's really important to honor people like Jean-Martin and Fortier, who are doing such amazing work in production, and all of the farmers that are feeding us. But in reality, in working with youth, I thought it would be really important to recognize that out of the less than 300,000 farmers we have in Canada, less than 8.2% are under the age of 35. So when you're working with youth, we're mainly speaking about consumers. And food and beverage companies know this, and I think it's really important to think through, when we're speaking of youth and often their parents, that we've come into a world where food is supposed to be cheap, fast, and convenient. A world where companies are spending more than $2 billion per year trying to help us see advertisements about food that's cheap, fast, and convenient, where executives of companies are asking, how can we drive more ounces into more bodies more often? Where we're exposed to 5,000 advertisements per year, advertising cartoon characters and people drinking Coca-Cola, which is maybe why more than 1/3 of youth in Canada are visiting fast food restaurants every day. At the same time, we're in a really interesting time in history with food insecurity, with 1.6 million Canadian households dealing with food insecurity, and many of these children going to school hungry. So I think that agroecology can play a really important role in thinking through our entire food system and providing options to create more connection, more resilience, But we're going to have to be creative, and we're going to have more exposure to farms, fisheries, gardens, chefs than we do to some of these advertisements. And I feel so lucky to be working on this with my work with the Sierra Youth Coalition and Meal Exchange on a project we call the Campus Food Systems Project. And our work is really to create connected food systems through universities, but to build these out through communities across the country. And so we've been funded by the McConnell Foundation in Montreal to work with campuses to build the student food movement to bring local sustainable food onto campuses across Canada. And it's really amazing. There's a true need for this. We sent out an application in 2011 asking, which universities want to build local sustainable food systems, and we had an overwhelming amount of responses. Over 37 universities, which is more than a third of universities in Canada, reached out to us with student leaders saying, yes, we want to be part of this movement, and we want to lead this movement at our institution. And what our work does is it's a relationship-based project, and it enables students to collaborate with administrators, food service providers, local farmers, community organizations, and other key players on and off campus to affect positive change in this complex food system. And I think it's really interesting working with universities. Of course, universities are places of privilege, but they have a very important role to play. In fact, North American universities and colleges are the world's 27th largest economy, and they have significant opportunities to provide and build sustainable supply chains to help boost local economies and help support farmers in their regions. And actually, we're seeing universities do incredible work. So we're really helping to rethink food systems. For example, the University of Victoria spends $6 million through local suppliers. And the University of British Columbia is feeding 35,000 students at 34 retail locations. And they've committed to spend over half their purchasing dollars towards local producers and distributors within 150 miles of their campus. And the exciting thing is that students are amazing renewable resources and are energized to do some of this research and to help find and source and answer some of the hugest questions. So we do quite a few things with the project. Number one is rethinking the food system. So connecting producers to distributors, to chefs, and to food waste managers, involving students in every aspect of the project. So an exciting question came up, what do we do with our organic waste? Well, why don't we imagine space on campus in a different way? And this photo here is at Ryerson University in downtown Toronto, which is similar to many universities that is on, Class 1 prime farmland, and being able to actually build and grow on campus. And though building and producing on campus doesn't feed campus, it provides an aspect for food literacy, for connecting to food systems, to provide places to help support mental wellness and overall well-being. A place that's open to community organizations, to community members, to staff, to share knowledge, and to really feel invigorated. And the photo on the right I love was a student at Carleton who'd been given a piece of land and was able to reimagine it at the time. We're also transforming learning. Students go to university to learn, and there's an opportunity to do something called applied student research or experiential learning, where they're actually going out and answering some of the biggest questions and some of the hugest problems and speaking to real individuals instead of spending time in the library typing papers and leaving them on the shelf to get dusty. They're actually making transformative change on university. How can we supply better? How can we market better? How can we explain the food system to students? And we're having students from neuroscience to biochemistry to nutrition work on these problems and feel empowered. And we're also connecting with community. We're working as far west as Vancouver Island University Nanaimo campus, as far north as Prince George University in British Columbia, and as far east as Memorial University in St. John's, Newfoundland. And so every campus has a different context and region and history. And by working with local community organizations, we're able to ensure that the work that's being done is relevant and supportive of the region. And overall, we're creating connections that matter. This is a beautiful photo of one of our coordinators from Capilano University and the University of British Columbia, Steve Golub. speaking to a group of students. We're creating connections across Canada and empowering students to feel positive. There were over 400 students empowered to create a national student food charter, which is a beautiful document sharing values of what students are caring about, which is now making its way into policy and contracts on universities across the country. So lots to share, lots to talk about, and I would love to speak about it a bit more and answer questions. So thank you for this opportunity, but I believe that there's a potential to inspire students and communities and create beautiful things in this country and globally.
Thank you very much, Sarah. That's a great presentation. And it's great to see how you're turning universities into greenhouses of ideas to fix the food system. So it's wonderful. Great. I'm delighted to invite Henry Lickers as our last speaker of the day, who's been listening carefully and who's going to share some of his views and his perspectives. So, Henry?
Well, I'm really happy to be here. It's good to see some of my friends. I haven't talked this way before such a big audience. We couldn't all fit in this room anyways, but I look at the food and the world around us as that place where we need to have the sustenance come to us. And I can always remember, I grew up on the Six Nations Indian Reserve down near Brantford, and I can remember listening to the teachers, some of the teachers that came from outside. And they always looked down all of the native people that were there. Oh, you're so poor. Oh, we were just terribly poor people. And they said, well, how do you know you're poor? Well, I've got no potato chips. God, there's no Coke here. You know, I can't have any ginger ale to drink. You know, there's not a Harvey's on every corner. All of these fast foods and things we didn't have them at home. We had good beef that grew ourselves. My grandfather used to say, you don't name the beef. We did all the time. He used to call the cows that we had for beef, he'd call them steak. You know, steak 1, steak 2, steak 3, and he named them. And the same way with pig. Yeah, it was pork chops and this was ham, you know. So we knew all of those type of things that we were growing was going to be used by the family. The agriculture that we do as Haudenosaunee people, we were one of the first agriculture people in Canada and United States, and we grew vast areas of our lands in crops, but they were all integrated together. So we grew the three sisters, corn, beans, and squash, and we had something like 100 different types of squash and beans. We had 73 to 80 different types of corn, and each of those were grown in different areas according to what those corn needed to do. So did we know those corn? Those corn were known to us because of their characteristics and how they grew. As we grew them, of course, in these the three sisters being grown together, we found that production was really very, very high. But it required people to work them. And in that requiring to work them, you need all of the custom and structure to be able to work. So according to our people, it's my responsibility as a man, to break the soil, to prepare that soil for my village or for my family or for my community. And then it's the responsibility of the women to come behind me and to sing the songs necessary for them to plant the corn, plant the beans, plant the squash, and to nurture them as they grew. The other thing that happened is that the children have a really intense responsibility. They were the ones to go into those crops and make sure that the birds and different other things that would eat those crops were kept at bay. Of course, this was great fun because you had to run between all of these mounds, chasing birds all the time. And I can remember as a young, really small guy, that every once in a while you could stop by a bean plant, grab a handful of beans and eat them, and boy, they were good beans, I tell you. And so those memories of the way that I lived when I was young keep coming back to me as I live. I remember my grandmother and my grandfather. My grandfather would help plant that and would not plant, but would help harvest when harvest came. And the whole year was covered by ceremony. So while your people look at the world around you, you say, well, there are 4 seasons in the year. You know, 4 seasons of fall, winter, and so on and so forth. With the Haudenosaunee, there were 6 seasons in the year. And there were 2 moons for every season. And so right now, we're getting ready to go into midwinter. The last of the harvest, the last harvest is being done. And what we're doing now is preparing for midwinter, when we will celebrate all of the things that we've taken from our gardens and that the world has supplied to us. It's also a renewal when we put out the fires of our longhouses, and those fires then are rebuilt and reburned and restarted. When we ask for forgiveness for all of the sins that we might have created in the past, and we see that those are done. And in a place like Akwesasne, where I work now, it's not a small place. Everyone knows Akwesasne because of the problems that they have with Mohawks and Cornwall and the area. But it's because of our intensity for the land and how we want to make sure that it's kept and maintained and prosperous to us. And so, again, when I look at the way in which our people live through those ceremonies, are they under threat? Of course they're under threat. In this world, with large agriculture, with large industry, large economy, what you find is that those economies can overrun the vast areas that we used to use in the past. So when we talk about a farm, for me, it's not just that area of tilled land. It's also the forest that surrounds that tilled land. Because in that forest were all of the different things that we could also bring to the land itself, whether it was leaves in the fall or different types of leaves that we would collect and put them into our fields. And it's also the marshes that were there. The vast things. My grandfather used to say that taifa, or cattail, was our grocery store. You could go and harvest cattail, the wonderful roots that were there, and you could roast them, and they taste a little bit like nuts, but have very, very nice taste to them, and they use them like potatoes. And every portion of that plant could be used. And so, again, when those taifa came up in the marshes, we were there. The various other plants that were there were useful for not only food, but also medicines. And so to keep as much biodiversity as we could upon the land was important to us. Interesting, though, that in Canada, you know, the first thing that Indian Affairs and the government said to us was, you've got to get modern. You've got to become good farmers. Not that we hadn't already farmed for the last 1,000 years, but now we had to become much better, much more efficient. And the first thing that they wanted was tractors and all of the other stuff. Very soon you find that it's hard to grow crops like that. And very soon our people reverted back to those gardens that we had in the past. Interesting, in the 1930s, which people maybe here don't understand, but the dirty 30s, the Mohawks used to send produce to Quebec and Montreal and Toronto and Ottawa to the soup kitchens, because we had so much that we couldn't eat it all. And so we said, as that, we share with our brothers and make sure that they're fed as well. And so, again, from this little wee reserve that's looked on right now with sometimes scorn, there are a whole group of people there who still practice those old methods of farming and the ways in which we work together. Interesting that as the modern society has gone on, we call those the 3 sisters, the corn, beans, and squash. There's also 3 sirens that are out there, and they are tempting our people. You know, fat, processed sugars, salt, those type of things that are causing us to change our dietary ways. But what we found is, as we've done that, diabetes, and all of these other diseases have become paramount in our communities. And so what we're hearing now from our elders is it's time that we go back to our traditional activities and our traditional ways in which we lived in order that we get rid of those problems. And I'll give you one last thing that worries me even more so, is that at Akwesasne what we saw is the decimation of the environment around us. The St. Lawrence River made it so, the industries made it so we couldn't fish. The contaminant burdens were so high that you couldn't eat those fish. We saw the marshes, because the St. Lawrence Seaway didn't allow the water levels to fluctuate anymore. We saw those marshes start to die and we could no longer use the produce there. The industry that surrounded us contaminated our lands. And so that it was very difficult to harvest and to grow cattle or to grow crops. And so you saw a group of people who depended upon the environment in order for them to survive. And as that, I'll call them the traditional economies, our people, started to disappear, non-traditional economies began to creep into the community. And you saw gambling and smuggling and all of the things that Canada and the surround know about Akwesasne coming in. So much so that in 1990, there was a revolution that occurred within our community where Mohawks fought against Mohawks. And suddenly you had Oka erupt across this country. And everybody went, whoa, what happened? What happened is that those traditional economies that we had in the past could no longer sustain our people in the proper ways that we could live. And brother fought brother over the last remaining things that we had. I'm happy to say that conflict, or unhappy to say that conflict cost Canada and the United States $2.5 billion to police Akwesasne. For an eighth of that money, we could have recovered all of the way our agriculture was in the past and the environment that surrounded us. There was no need to go down that route. And so what I listened to Miguel talking to my other friends here, remember that the outcome isn't this, that you're supplying food to your family or to your people or to your university, but you're preventing those civil wars that will come in the future that will cost us immensely. And I don't think, as a Native person, I don't want you to suffer the same thing we did at Akwesasne. And so we'll continue to work. Right now we're getting ready for canning and teaching canning again to our people, washing corn, doing all those things that we're supposed to. And the Midwinter Festival is coming up right now, our most important time of the year. I think you get a guy in red comes with antlers and stuff, I don't know. But we have nothing like that, but again, we celebrate the world that surrounds us. So I hope that those words will be helpful to you.
Thank you so much, Henry. I think we could listen to you all day with all those great stories. It's very moving and very curious to see Akwesasne and see how farming has been taking place there for centuries and centuries, and people are very proud of that, and it's great for you to share that with us today. That's really wonderful. Some commonalities just from the different speakers that we heard today is this deep care and love for the land and this sense of responsibility, and also this confidence that in the knowledge that they have, and that the future is not so bleak if we listen to ourselves and care for the earth. So it's really wonderful presentations. Thank you. I'm going to invite Ferris to say some concluding remarks.
Can I add something before Ferris talks? Hello.
Yes, please go ahead. Go ahead, Miguel.
You know, one of the things that we didn't talk about a little bit is the potential of urban agriculture. You see, in the third world, the food justice movement is a rural movement. In the north, it's an urban movement. In the United States, we have 2% of the population farming with an average age of farmers of 64 years. So the potential for urban agriculture using all those tools and all the techniques that were explained is huge. Here in Oakland, which is a city near here, We have food insecure neighborhoods where people are living on food stamps and eating junk food, and at the same time there's 1,200 acres of abandoned land, public land. If we adopted the Cuban urban agriculture techniques, they have 50,000 hectares of urban agriculture in Cuba with a productivity of 20 kilos per square meter per year. If we adopted those techniques and we only produce 5 kilos, 1/4 of the productivity of the Cubans, in 120 acres, which is 500 hectares, we could be producing enough food to feed 400,000 people. There's no need for people to be obese and food insecure in the low-income neighborhoods here in the Bay Area. There's no political will, and there's no also commitment on the part of the universities to go to those neighborhoods and promote urban agriculture. So I'm sure that the same challenge happens in your cities where you have a lot of abandoned land, on land that is, in parks that nobody uses or whatever, that could be put into production, and the implications of bringing food. Remember, a city like Toronto, how many million you have in Toronto? 6 million? You need to import into that city about 3,000 tons of food per day in order to feed all those people. Think about the food miles and the emissions and all that goes into a city like that. Well, if you can produce 50% of the food with urban agriculture, the implications for health, the implications for emissions, for energy savings, et cetera, is huge. So agroecology is now finding a tremendous application in urban agriculture. Thank you.
Thank you, Miguel. Ferris here. Yes, I really hear you. And lucky for us in Toronto, there's not only some amazing food activists, but also a Toronto Food Policy Council that is definitely addressing those questions. So my task is to wrap up. This has been an incredible afternoon, full of imagery and reimagining seems to be the word. I think reseeding perhaps is another word, just given what Jean-Martin has just shown us. And I think perhaps we have been seeding the question of what is agroecology, because that was raised many times today. And I think that question only starts here. It will grow. And all the communities who've been listening, we've had more than 300 of you. Please plant that question in your community, and let's see what grows. And we'd love to hear from you and keep this conversation alive. I feel that it's only the beginning. Again, Miguel, you're a wonderful, not only champion, but a hero for agroecology and a real inspiration for us. So we thank you. We know it's been difficult to have you, and I think in a way we did the best thing, which is to have you appear online. We saved a lot of jet fuel during the week that people are discussing climate change in Poland. So this was, in a way, our little action, but also it allowed us to reach so many Canadians across the country. You said that agroecology is a policy, a practice, and a social movement. I think those are very true. And I think you evoked kind of a rainbow of diversity. And maybe that's an image we should leave with. And as we continue our work, it means different things to different people, but we certainly have a common vision for agroecology. Finally, I'd like to thank the other panelists, Jean-Martin, Sarah, Henry. I have images of the three sisters and the three sirens, students trying to connect to slops of food in cafeterias. And of course, Jean-Martin, your tools were unbeatable, and I might have to borrow some soon. Bob, who's hopefully listening, we thank you for your commitment. There's a couple more people we need to thank. One is definitely my colleague, Geneviève Grossenbacher from USC Canada, who's here, who has really carried this through, and her organizational and problem-solving skills have really brought us to where we are today. So thank you, Jen. Nydia, who's from Food Secure Canada, who's on the other end of the line, who kept us going. The crew in the back of our production studio, all the colleagues of the working group, and Ron, who's helping us here from USC Canada, and our team at USC. Thank you. First, for the biggest thanks goes to you who are listening, who've tuned in and taken part in this conversation. And as I said, we hope you continue this conversation. We've also tried to do some outreach through media work and also meeting some parliamentarians later today. So you're probably saying, okay, I'm plugged into the conversation. What can I do? Can I do something? Can I join something? Can I change something? Can I ask something? Well, yeah, I can do all of those. So what can you join? Well, one thread running throughout this meeting is Food Secure Canada. So yeah, please join this amazing network of activists and thinkers and doers called Food Secure Canada. It's a major hub of activity, information, and on a personal level, if you're not already a member of a community-supported agriculture initiative or network, please do become a member of your local CSA and start thinking of another whole season of food. Finally, all of what we've done costs money. So if you are inclined to support the wonderful organizations who have brought this to you, of course, that would be wonderful and very welcome. The clips from today will be available on the website usccanada.org/feedingtheworld in a few days. Vous pourrez regarder cette transmission en français aussi dans quelques jours si vous visitez le site web que je viens de mentionner, usc-canada.org/feedingtheworld. Thank you again for everybody for tuning in, and looking forward to continue the conversation.